pretty much broke you in half. So theories of the witchcraft craze during the Renaissance period. There are many things that can be said about this, and they all have pivotal and substantial beliefs. Go back. No, not that. Okay. Monetary reasons. Obviously, this was a big business back then. In order to keep it going, there were witches saying and convicting other people of being witches. So obviously, the monetary that was coming in was influential. Religious reasons I've described with Malleus Maleficarum. There's an attack on different people just simply for being different. You were attacked, whether you were a beggar, mentally ill, or any reason. You were attacked, and it was mostly single women, which maybe we'll go into more detail within her presentation. And a means of revenge. Revenge was a big theory back then, simply for the fact that debts were owed to people, so in order to get them to pay up, they convicted them of witchcraft. And then each one of these theories has plausible evidence. Okay, so then we get into my favorite part within this, is Shakespeare's Macbeth. So we have the Weird Sisters, which pretty much fit any connotation of a witch during the Renaissance medieval time period. They have their magical powers, and it can be argued that they have the ability to control weather, simply for the fact that they meet in the first act and they ask, well, when do we want to meet again? Is it in lightning and thunder? And they go about that. So it can be argued that they can control weather. There are women who partake in rituals, which is very important to be considered a witch back then. They have their nocturnal meetings with Macbeth. They partake in ritual sacrifice. They're sacrificing baboon's blood, dog's tongue, and all that. And it is hard to tell whether they have made a pact with the devil, but with the connotation back then with the Renaissance, it could be said that they did make that pact with the devil. Thus, Shakespeare has included almost every characteristic of a witch. And I'm going to show this little video clip for you guys. It's kind of scary, but it's actually Macbeth, and it's the Weird Sisters partaking in the double toil and trouble. This 5 minutes. Okay, this is the modern take on it. So, even though it is a modern take, I still believe it has everything that you need to know about a witch back then. As you can see, that's pretty creepy. But I really think that that pretty much meets every connotation that a witch had back then. You see them partaking in rituals over dead bodies. So yeah, it's pretty intense. Then I found it very interesting. I was reading a book on a history of witchcraft, and I found it interesting that during Shakespeare's time, James I, who was the reigning king, actually was the person that hanged the most witches of English monarch in history. So I kind of pose the question, does Shakespeare's Macbeth have anything to do with the hangings of the witches? And then we move into kind of counteract the idea within Macbeth. We have The Tempest, written later than Macbeth. Could have been his last play, but that's not proven. And then we have Prospero. Obviously within Prospero, he is seen as a good wizard, simply for the fact that he just wants to regain what he had originally. He wants to go back where he was originally from and gain that back. So within that, you can kind of compare and contrast Shakespeare's Macbeth and Tempest within the connotations of witchcraft. So my final breakdown of this is that from the crazy connotation that surrounds a witch will forever be indebted to the Renaissance time period and the medieval time period, simply for the fact that with Halloween coming up, all you're going to see is witches with green makeup and all that going on. And various numbers have been thrown out there about how many have actually died within the witchcraft craze, but there's no real solid number, but anywhere between 40,000 and 50,000 can be agreed upon. And even though the witchcraft began to slow down in Europe, it finally picked up pace within America with the Salem witch trials. And if I have time later, I will show this to you. It's just pretty much artwork from the Renaissance time period that explained the witch's Sabbath and all that. But I'm going to move on to Megan.
Okay, I didn't mention this earlier, but the presenters have decided that they would like to present everything, and then we'll do all discussion and questions at the end. So we're going to go straight into Megan Cross, who will be doing Salem witch trials, mass hysteria and its influence in power in America. She's an English and history major at the University of Finland and would also like to go to grad school.
All right, like Derek said, I'm going to be talking about the Salem witch trials, and I'm kind of going to be going into what constituted the trials and talking about the different causes that happened to it. With the time I have today, I'm really going to go into just a basic overview, and if you have any discussion questions later, I can be sure to do that. But, so I kind of started off, and I was thinking, so the Salem witch trials are probably one of the most studied trials with witches in history. Like, even looking back with small children in history classes, they learn about Christopher Columbus, they learn about the Pilgrims, and then they're probably going to talk about the Salem witchcraft trials a little bit. So I was thinking, you know, people learn about it so early on, and yet there's so many misconceptions about it. There's a lot of debate going on about what caused it. Was it a combination of things? Was it one specific thing? So it's very interesting to go kind of in depth and kind of discuss this a little bit. But just to kind of start off with a little overview, it can be argued that it started in late January 1692 and ended in March or May 1693. Depending on the research you look at, there's a lot of varying statistics about how many people were accused, how many people died, how many people did this, but most agreed that it was over 150 arrested and imprisoned, many more accused, and somewhere between 26 and 35 hanged, with over 10 dying while imprisoned. So that's a lot in a small town. But just to begin, Betty Paris was 9 years old and Abigail Williams was 11 years old, and they kind of started off this accusation process. In late January, they all of a sudden started having what could best be described in research as epileptic fits. They had muscle contractions, they started throwing themselves all over the floor, saying that witches were after them, and they were so tortured by these witches every night. And the first three that they accused were very important. If I know how to turn this. Yeah, just go ahead. Huh. Well, the first three accused I think are very important because they kind of illustrate how the accusation process went throughout the whole trials. These three people are very illustrative of the type of people who were accused, especially at the beginning. And I want to say, too, that at this time period, especially where Derek left off, witches were no longer regarded as anything positive. That you didn't call yourself a witch and then go bear somebody's child. They would not let you do that. Like, it was called other things, and it was very wrapped up in religious overtones. Witches were supposed to have been in contract with the devil and with demons and things like that, so it wasn't really regarded as positive. So obviously, if you're accused of a witch, it's not a good thing at this time. But the first three that were accused were Sarah Good, Sarah Osborne, and Tituba. And just to kind of explain them, Sarah Good was a beggar, single woman, which is very hard to be at this time. She often went around from house to house asking for charity. People were scared of her because she looked different, and she often muttered to herself if nobody helped her. Sarah Osborne was also elderly, a single woman, and a widow, and she often did not go to church, which was really bad at this time period, did not go to the cornerstone of your society's church. She often was found taking an active role in her own finances, which was also a very bad thing to do because you're supposed to kind of go to your next male relative, and they kind of distrusted her for that, going against these kind of societal roles. And then Tituba was Reverend Samuel Parris's slave, and also hung out a lot with Betty Parris and things like that. And she, in different researches, she was put as different ethnicities. Sometimes she's written as African, sometimes Caribbean, sometimes even Native American. But all agree that she was a different race, and that probably played a hand into her being accused because she had a lot of religious customs that they would not have understood. Betty Parris often said when she accused her that they'd go into the woods and do different rituals. They would kind of put egg yolks in water and do fortune telling, which was very easily taken as something evil, whether or not it was. So these three kind of illustrate what types of people are going to be accused. But so later on in the trials, just to kind of overview the accusation process, like what's going to happen? Can somebody just like scream, "You're a witch," and then they're hanged? So I wanted to kind of illustrate this a little bit more fully. But first, something bad would happen, whether it's a tragedy, a stillborn birth, a famine, even just something stolen, or somebody falls ill, that somebody decides is a product of witchcraft. So the person that is accusing would go to the local magistrate and they would launch a complaint against a specific person for witchcraft. And if this complaint was found to be truthful or founded, then the person would go out and be arrested and be taken to be examined. Now, they called it examined, but it was probably more like interrogation. They really, really wanted you to say you were guilty, basically. It wasn't a torture area as in Derek's time, but it was definitely, you were put a lot of pressure on, and they really wanted you to say something, and a lot of people were found as guilty when they really just kind of wanted to get out of that situation because it was very intense. But whether or not the person said they were guilty or not, if the magistrate is satisfied that this matter is further founded, the person would be taken to a superior court and summoned in front of a grand jury. And in that case, they would bring witnesses to the stand to discuss what they saw, if they saw anything, usually against the witness. They would talk about spectral and non-spectral evidence, are the two types of evidence they usually brought. Spectral evidence would be something like the person being accused came to the person in a dream or a vision, like they saw them as a witch or as a ghost or a demon coming against them, which is a little hard to prove because it was mostly just the person saying they saw them and somebody else saying, "Oh, me too." So non-spectral evidence then would be more of a typical kind of evidence you would think of in a typical court setting. It was documented evidence, this person saw this person, etc. But after this, the decision would be made and they would either be let go or the execution would be carried out. If they were found guilty and they would be executed, they would be excommunicated from the church, which is obviously a big deal in this society, and they would not be given a proper burial. To this day, a lot of people whose ancestors were involved in the Salem witch trials go back and try to find where remains were or anything and try to give them a proper burial that way. But yeah, so because of all of this, all these accusations coming out, they decided to first put it in a normal court, like it was a typical court system, but then after so many accusations, they created a special court just for it, called, and I'm going to pronounce it wrong, but it's called the Court of Oyer and Terminer? So it's written right there. But the lieutenant governor was William Stout.